Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we are delighted to welcome a man from the mountains, Monte Crabbs, horror and dark fantasy author, and clearly a fan of the CU. Are those the bisons, the buffalo?
They're the buffaloes.
Yeah, well, thank you, Monty, so much for joining us today. What is the weather like over in Colorado?
Well, I'm actually down in Scottsdale, Arizona at the moment. It's the weather in Colorado is a little bit colder than it is here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to chat to you. But before we begin, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Monty. Let's discuss, I know that you've written, this is your first book, I think, and it's sort of a horror mystery type book, but why don't you tell us a bit about it? And then what I want to do is sort of talk about the horror and mystery genre for authors that are looking to write that, so we can get some of your perspective on it. So why don't you give us a little brief discussion about who you are and what led you to writing your book now and what kind of book it is, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast. And a little bit about myself. I was a school librarian for 25 years. And before that, I was a special ed teacher. And that job was a struggle for me. And I spent almost all my time in the library realizing that I needed to change careers because books are my thing. Going back to my childhood, my dad hands me a Stephen King novel when I'm like 10. And then from then on, I was hooked. So I tried my hand at writing about 20 years ago. I took a writing class because I thought, I think I would love to write a novel. Well, jumping into the novel, it was a struggle for me. I actually finished it, and then I reread it, and then I thought, well, would this be something I would check out from a library or purchase and read myself? And the answer was a loud no. So I tabled it, and it was been on my computer for 20 years, and my son kept bugging me to revisit that, and I never did. But I stayed in touch with books through the library, and I was K-12, read to kids. It was a great career.
So that's so interesting. I know it takes a lot of self-awareness to write a novel and then be like, oh, is anybody going to read that? I do know a few authors who write their first novel and then it's kind of like a proof of concept of like, oh, I can write a novel if I want to, but then they put it away and write one that they think is going to be more marketable.
Right. So my book that I just published at the end of last month is a book of short stories. And the short story for me was way less intimidating. Matter of fact, I took that old novel and I rewrote it as a short story, and I like it a lot better. So
what is it? Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit.
True. And yeah, in high school, I was always a sprinter, and long distance and marathons scare me to death. And I think that came back to me in my writing career.
So what are the stories about then? Are they all a central theme, or are they all sort of standalone, or?
They are all standalone, and we struggled with subject headings on my book because, like, the first one, Echoes in the Hall, is I guess it borders on science fiction because there's a robot teacher, but it's also a mystery. There is a few scary scenes, but probably in my books, there's probably more humor than there is things that are frightening. I have one story, the one that I rewrote is definitely a fantasy. And the last two border on horror. And the very last one is, I've been told, is the creepiest one of all. So,
well, creepy is always a good description. I like it.
And then I'm starting some other stories now, and I'm leaning towards the more creepy end of things. So,
and so, have you gotten feedback from readers about the ones that sort of resonate with them the most? Is it the creepier ones, and that's why you're sort of heading in that direction?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The last two in there, I get the most comments from, and they were that goes down that creepiness.
Now, you mentioned that the first book that your father hoisted on you was a Stephen King one, and Stephen King is so good at generating an atmosphere. And when you say creepy, to me that is definitely a compliment about your writing, because it means that you're generating like an atmosphere and a sense of unease that goes through the entire book, and that's something that Stephen King was so good at. So do you think you're inspired by Stephen King?
Absolutely. And I read his book on writing, I believe it's called.
Yes.
And I've read that a couple times, and I've taken so much from that book, even though it's a little bit dated with technology, but what he says is spot on. It helps me. I think about that all the time, about I write too much. I'm able to narrow it down, just take away the stuff that people don't want to hear, even though you think it's a great sentence. It just doesn't need to be there. So those are the kind of things that helped me a lot.
I find that interesting.
Yeah, I think Roland and I have both read that book, and that was one of the best, in my opinion, it was one of the best books on writing that I'd read. Right. So that was, and he's the kind of person you want to study if you're writing horror and creepiness.
Well, he's a pantster, though, isn't he? They call them plotters and pantsters, and there are people who plot books out, and there are people who just write by the seat of their pants. And I think he describes writing as, you're like an archaeologist. Oh, no, an archaeologist, I guess. That you're like dusting away the layers and uncovering what's beneath. And would you say that? Are you a plotter or a pantster? Do you plot your stories out, or you just
I totally wing them. I have a starting point, and then I get into it, and I have to table it for a bit because I don't know how it's going to end. And a lot of times I think of these things in the middle of the night. I'll wake up and it'll just come to me, and I just get out my little notepad and I jot down what I just thought about, and then I hash it out, and then I come up with my endings. For me, and I love to read everything, mostly horror and mystery and science fiction, but I love short stories. And a lot of times I love the stories, and then I always feel like in a lot of cases the endings are not what I think they should be, and I always think, I could have come up with a better ending than that. And I don't know if I am, but I hope I am, because I noticed that. I mean, you got to get into the plot right away. You got to catch the reader right off the short story, because you don't, and then it's got to have a conclusion that resonates.
I think short stories are some of the stories that resonate with you the most. I'm sorry, Craig, I totally cut you.
No, I was gonna say, like, just the same sort of thing. It's like then that's harder with short stories, right? Is coming up with a good ending, but also in horror, I would think it's even more difficult, because to create that atmosphere of creepiness and of being scary, of the horror within a short story, and build your characters and have a satisfying conclusion, like that's a tougher project, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely the harder part, but it's also I enjoy that, because I just like to tie it up and leave people. You got to leave them hanging a little bit, but you still have to have a conclusion to some sort.
And that's something Stephen King, even the last It movies they made, they joked about how he's never been good at endings. I mean, I don't necessarily, if I completely agree with that. Part of his appeal is
I kind of agree that with the story It, where the whole that's a long book to get through, and then all of a sudden it's just this big spider, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and I think part of that is, if you're not planning it out, sometimes you write yourself into a corner at the end, and you're like, I don't know how to end this, and then you come up with something ridiculous.
I know. I think there was what was the one story that was the fog or the mist or something, that he didn't even know how to end it, so he didn't.
So I was thinking of your story. So where did you get the inspiration for? Like, you've got the short stories that you have in your book, like The Crawl Space. I like the idea of that. Somebody crawling into a small confined space, which automatically gives you anxiety. The fact that there are bugs in there, again, that gives you anxiety. Was that kind of your motivation? What inspired that story?
Well, because I did get a part-time job going down into somebody's crawl space, and there was hardly any light. I had my flashlight. I mean, there was dust everywhere, and to get underneath there, I almost felt like, man, if I don't come out the same way I went in, I'm not going to be able to get out. And I started this was a long time ago, and I thought, man, if I ever write a book, I'm going to have to revisit this moment, because I am not comfortable down in here, and you never know what's going to happen. And so in my story, all the things from my childhood fears pop up.
I was thinking of all the most scary horror film I've ever seen was called The Descent, and it was about a bunch of women who go caving. And then in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I remember when I was a kid, with her having to go through reach through the passageway with all the bugs everywhere. I remember being like viscerally freaked out as a kid. So they're very powerful.
I know. I don't really feel like I have a natural fear about small spaces or anything like that, but I do remember a few years back, I had taken my kids. I don't even remember where it was, but it was sort of it was a guided tour-y type thing through some caves and stuff. And we did get to this one point where, we had to crawl through a part that you really had to squeeze through. And I was definitely bigger than they were. And I started to do it, and I could feel like it was tight. And I almost had like a panic attack where I was just like, I don't want to do this, because if I get stuck, what happens? So I was like, is there another way around? And oh yeah, there is, because bigger people shouldn't go there. And they told me I'd probably be fine, but that wasn't, enough confidence. You'll probably be good. But I never had that anxiety until I was, getting in there and realizing, this is a tight fit. And so it's almost like with horror, you have to lock into what some of our primal fears are and just jump onto those, right?
And that's what's maybe intriguing to me for reading horror, is that you find yourself in experiences like that, like you experienced, and it's a real thing. And with a horror book or a movie, it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm glad I am not the person going through that, because I don't know how I would handle it. I read a story one time about it. It was a kid got stuck in an avalanche, and and the whole book was what he had to do to survive that, being in the snow to stay alive until somebody found him. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, I go skiing all the time, and that would be horrible. I'm so glad that's not me, but I couldn't stop reading the story.
Well, talking about the people who are the victims of horror, like Peter, the character from the crawl space. How did you come up with Peter? And was that a representation of yourself? Was an independent character? All stories are based on characters. How did you come up with him?
Well, I'm not sure how I came up with the name Peter. I don't know, it just made sense at the time. But the character itself was probably me from way back when, crawling through down in there I don't even remember why I was down there, what I was doing. And it actually was my brother-in-law that sent me in there, and then he left. And
and I think not all sort of fears can be turned into a story. I mean, maybe they can be, but I'm thinking about, I don't love public speaking. Doing a podcast is one thing, but I don't love getting up in front of a crowd, and I have anxiety about that. I'm not sure that can be turned into a horror story necessarily, but typically though, you're looking at those fears, and that's why a lot of stories are about monsters and they're spiders and they're being trapped. So you really have to think about what it is that scares people en masse, right? Because you want to appeal to as many readers as you can. And if you pick something that's a very specific fear, some people might have a fear of agoraphobia or whatever, but most people won't, of open spaces. Most people are not going to be able to relate to that. So it's going to be harder to make it scary. So how do you hone in on sort of what those primal fears are in our psyche.
Well, yeah. As you go about your day, or me, I try to be observant in things that are normal. And how about if this thing turns into be not normal? For instance, the last story, Death by Mangrove. We visit the Keys quite often, and the mangroves, they make up a lot of the Keys. And we have a boat, and we go through the little canals and the mangroves on both sides, and it's kind of peaceful. But then somebody in the boat said, "Oh, I wonder what's underneath those mangroves." And I got to thinking, "Oh my gosh, what is underneath the mangroves?" And then I kept coming back to that, and so then that's the basis of that story.
Yeah, sometimes it's that little question that somebody asks innocently that in a writer's mind, we take that and we sort of turn over it, whereas other people would just be like, "What's under the mangroves? I don't know." And they move on, right? Whereas writers are like, "What is under the mangroves?"
I know.
That's a good question. And then we, instead of Googling it, we try to figure out what, ridiculous thing might be under there that we could write a story about.
Yeah, I had to research mangrove. Well, I'm a librarian, so that's what I do. And find out how they grow and why they're there and all that. And that was a fun one. My wife is, who is also a published author. She writes nonfiction. And she likes to watch the Hallmark Christmas movies. And near the end, I always I verbalize a different ending to the show. And she's not always that happy about my comments, but that's what I try to do, is just think of alternative endings that wouldn't be as, stereotypical as a regular Christmas movie.
Right. The horror version of
the
Hallmark.
Gone wrong. The
Hallmark Christmas massacre, right?
Yeah.
So do you just keep a list of ideas as they come upon you in regular life, on your phone and on a notepad, and then when you're ready to write, you sort of look at that list and be like, okay, today I'm gonna think more about mangroves and write a story about that.
I do. I have a little notebook, and I also have notes on my phone. So if I think of something, I have quite a few to go for to pick from.
And do you run them by, your wife or somebody else to say, does this sound scary to you?
Yeah, I do. And then she's she's so creative, and she starts coming up with all these ideas, and then I can't keep up with her. And then thinking, okay, I'll think about that. But it's a lot of fun.
And now, do you have any mentors, writers group, friends who write? What's the best piece of advice about writing you've ever received?
Well, the best piece of advice, other than that book, and I took a writing class about 20 years ago from she was a romance author, and so I learned a lot from her. My grammar skills, I think I learned more from my high school English language arts teacher than I learned anything from in college. I don't know. I'm always drawn towards that kind of genre. My favorite musical artist is Alice Cooper, and I've seen him quite a few times. But the person lately that I've learned from is my writing coach. And the only reason that this book came about was because 2 years ago, my wife, for my Christmas present, was a writing coach, which I immediately said, I don't want to do that. I'd actually have to talk to somebody, and then they would have to read what I wrote. And so I thought about it, and so I did it. And then she was so kind and understanding, and she gave me some really good ideas. And this part doesn't make sense. It needs a rewrite. And then I would rewrite it, and then we would discuss it. And then she really helped me through it. And so later on, I didn't rely on her as much, because I paid attention to what she had said. And then and it's getting easier. So hopefully my next book will be better.
Now, the drum tech is self-published, is that right? Or is it
Yes.
through Raven View? Raven View is your publishing company.
Yeah, I thought of that name. That is my publishing company.
No, that's awesome. So why did you choose self-publishing rather than try and get a traditional thing? By the way, I think you made the right decision. I'm totally down with self-publishing. I think
Absolutely.
traditional publishing companies are...
Well, I researched the process, and I had somebody helping me, and we talked about both avenues, and if I wanted to just get it done quicker and less painful and less rejections, to go this way. So
you didn't want to wait a year to
right
to get your book out there, right?
I know.
You're done. You're ready to
yeah, because I think in the book, Stephen King submitted works to Alfred Hitchcock and got rejected. So, okay, if he's getting rejected, what are my chances? So,
well, but even when you get accepted, it's still at least a year between the whole process, right? If it's self-publishing, you finish your book today, you can publish it tomorrow. It's such a seamless process at this point,
right?
But yeah, no, it's great. That's a great Christmas present. We've had a couple book coaches on the podcast, and I can tell they add a lot of value to an author, especially at the beginning of their careers when they're just starting out and they're figuring out the whole writing process. Having somebody there that can give you that advice and help you along the way is invaluable.
Exactly, and being a teacher, a lot of my English language arts friends who are reading my book, it's a little intimidating to me because that's not my background. But so far, I mean, they're my friends, so they're not going to. I wish they would just be honest, but
well,
okay, you're my friend, so okay, yeah, of course you're going to say you like it, but what do you really?
That's why we always say, don't give. I mean, you give your book to your friends and family, but that's not the only.
That's not right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. You go ahead, Craig.
What do you think it is that sort of like makes people want to read horror, especially if it's scary? Like, I think of my daughter who's terrified of spiders. She would never watch a movie about spiders. Even we were on the Harry Potter ride in Orlando, in Orlando, in Universal, and one of them and it just had a spider on the screen, and she was like couldn't even look at it. But then there's other people who these things terrify them, and they want to watch a movie about it. They want to read a book about it. Why is it that we want to be terrified?
Well,
or some people.
I think we touched on that a little bit a while ago about it's just a safe place to face your fears, where you're not the victim, and you're glad you're not. Like a movie I watched on the plane the other day was Final Destination, the last one.
Oh yeah.
We had just been to Toronto and went up into the Space Needle or whatever they call it, and looks like the Space Needle
Tower, yeah.
And then the whole opening scene of that, I'm just going, well, I'm so glad I didn't watch this before we went up there. But it's intriguing because you're looking for things that are going to go bad, and it's always something that you don't expect. But you're still glad you're not in that scene. So for me, they're just more entertaining for me. My little sister, when she was probably 5, wanted to watch a horror movie with me, and she just loved it. And I said, "You okay?" And she was okay. She goes, "Yeah, this is great." I go, "Okay. We don't have to watch this." And she goes, "No, I love this." And then later on, I found her in the bathroom crying, and I felt so horrible. But now as an adult, she tends to not watch scary movies, and I think I ruined it for her at an early age.
Yeah, I mean, little kids always want to watch a horror movie, and the parents always have to tell them,
I know.
no. But
And
it's
I
interesting
was a
because
brother.
well, exactly. But for some people, it's fine. Like I have a friend of mine who has 3 daughters, and they're all young, and they watch horror movies together all the time. And I'm just like, my kids never, they would
Right.
never sleep again. And I don't like them either. I mean, as a kid though, I wanted to watch them. I think I watched Friday the 13th with my mom, and she said like I spent the whole time like like that
Right.
with my hands over my eyes, and
Oh yeah. And with me, it was a show called Creature Features that was all black and white. Wolfman, Frankenstein, and my folks would let my brother and I lay out with sleeping bags in front of the TV and watch this because it was late at night. And I just remember, I don't think we ever made it through the night out there because we would hear things out on the deck bumping around after we turned off the TV, and pretty much always went back to our beds. But yeah, we just the next Saturday night we're out there again.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so great about horror as a genre is it's always the best horror is always very grounded. So I live in New Jersey, and surprisingly, an awful lot of iconic horror films are set in New Jersey, like Friday the 13th.
All right.
Like that. And Halloween, I think, was set in Jersey, or was that in, I don't know, but it's because it's a suburban environment and it's something familiar. The crawl space is a great idea because the idea of going to a crawl space is a real thing that you can imagine because whoever you are, you've probably seen that. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of whether I could ever write horror myself, and I wonder, if it takes a certain mindset. I feel like I can write a lot of different things, but I'm not sure that I could write horror. I think you have to really have sort of the mindset to really want to dive into this scary. Like, when you're writing it, are you scaring yourself? Like, how do you know if something's scary? Because it feels like when you're writing it, so it probably isn't that scary, right? But
exactly,
you have to know whether it will be for someone else. So how do you know that while you're writing?
So I like this, the Death by Mangrove. I wrote it. I kind of knew where I was going, and then I had to come up with an ending. And then once it got onto Audible, and then you have to sit there and listen to it. So I sat in my room in the dark listening to the story. And a lot of stuff, you write it and you wrote it, but you don't recall all the stuff you said, and it was just kind of creeping me out. I said, okay, well that's good, and in my stories there's probably a lot of humor mixed in with the creepiness, and it just makes me chuckle. And I don't know, and maybe that's just me because I was also a track coach and get my team together, and I would tell these stupid jokes and I would laugh at them, and finally they'd say, "Coach, nobody laughs at your jokes but you." I go, "Yeah, I know, but they're still hilarious."
That's what my kids say to me. Yeah. Yeah. So are you intentionally adding the humor to sort of lighten the mood a bit and take some of the edge off of the horror? Because it feels like that's kind of what it would do if you have a horror, but then you have some levity. It sort of releases that tension a little bit. Although then you could it could also be a way to get people off balance. Everyone's joking around, having a good time, and then they all die.
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. And hangs out with me, gets my dry sense of humor, and it comes out in my writing. So it's a lot of times it's not even intentional. I just think of that. I go, okay, that'd be funny, and and it does. I think it does add to the story because it's not just all dark and dismal. It's still, my characters. I hopefully are believable because everybody has a little bit of a sense of humor. I've read books where and seen a lot of times some of the older movies. It's just so dark and nobody jokes about anything, and I thought the newer movies don't do that as much. They mix it up a little bit better.
I think humor is very important. With horror, there's a lot of pacing. You have that creeping existential dread where nothing's bad that's happening, but things feel kind of loose, and then you get like the horror parts which really grab you and like make
Right.
you freeze. And then in some ways humor is important because you inject the humor and it allows you to relax your muscles again, which means you're prepped to suddenly clench up again the next time
Right.
something scary happens.
Right, because if you're always on edge, then you can't surprise anybody. You're right.
Yeah.
You gotta lighten them up a bit.
Yeah, although there's movies where I'll be watching it with one of my kids, and I guess maybe it's the music that they'll play in the background where something's coming, and it's not, you're still scared. Like I'm sure a jump scare is coming now, and we're both like ready for it, and then when it comes, we still jump.
Yeah, even movies you've seen before, it still gets you.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder with writing, and again, I don't read a lot of horror, and I don't watch a lot of horror, but is there sort of an equivalent of a jump scare in writing a horror?
Absolutely. And the one book that I can remember happening to me was, I guess it was Pet Sematary, because I really didn't know what it was about when I was reading this book, because I don't like to read the covers and get any idea of what's going to happen. And so I was reading that book, and then when they buried the cat, and then all of a sudden the cat's back in the scene, and they're just like, whoa, what? Stuff like that. Yeah, so the books can do it too, and it's just all the way how it's presented. So
yeah. Do you put that kind of element in yours, or is yours more of like an atmospheric creepiness rather than sort of the jump scare type of thing, like in the stories that you typically write?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Like
in the stories that you're typically writing, are you writing more? Do you try to do more of a creepy atmosphere type story, or are you looking for like those big jump scares, the extreme? You do put a lot of some are like slasher films, lots of gore, whereas others are more just that atmosphere of creepiness.
More of the atmosphere of creepiness, because I don't have a lot of gore in my movies. I mean, one of them has a vampire, but we don't go into the acts, but we know that he does bad things because that's who he is, but it all kind of happens outside of the writing, but it does happen. So I think that's why I wouldn't have any problem with young adults reading my books. I don't go into the gore, but you can do other things and not have that in your books that still get to people. I believe
the psychological horrors too, whereas you're sort of messing with their minds more than anything.
Right.
Stephen King said, yeah, if you can't make it scary, make it gory. But he always used to say the scary part is the stuff that stays with you.
Yeah,
right.
I think about one of those movies I watched when I was younger, that one of the horror movies that I did watch, and I didn't continue watching all the others that came after it, but the Saw movie, right?
Man, the very first one's the best one.
Yeah, exactly, and I saw that one.
Yeah,
and it's like
the ending is just like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming.
Well, to me, it's like there's lots of gore there too, but it was the psychological part of it, the choices that they had to make, and just that was more unnerving to me than that starts my brain thinking like, oh, what would I do in that situation?
Yeah, what would you do when you have this thing on your head that's going to do something terrible, unless you take a knife and dig out a key that's behind your eyeball?
Right.
What?
Like I don't even know.
Yeah, I know. And who thinks of those things?
Oh yeah, who thinks of that? It's like a real question, and that person needs some help. But
yeah.
But yeah, like I think that's another kind of horror where it's the second, like, because they don't even need the gore in that. It's just those choices that they have to make. And it just messes with your mind sometimes, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of different kinds of horror, I guess, out there. And I don't like any of it, really. I mean, it's not that I don't like it, but it's just not my type thing. Like I said, I watched that stuff when I was younger, and then that's when I learned, that's not for me.
Now, we unfortunately are approaching the top of the hour. So before we wrap things up, first of all, Craig, do you have any final questions? But then, Monty, I was going to ask you to tell us everything about where people can find out more about you, where they can find your books and things. But I shall defer to Craig for any final questions.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's no final questions really. It's just, this has been an interesting discussion about horror. There's so many different types and so many reasons why people watch it and so many ways that you can write it. So, people that are thinking about writing horror, it's not just a matter of, thinking of one scary thing and then making a story out of it. You have to think of that atmosphere. You have to think about the ending, making sure it's a satisfying ending. And, do you want it to be creepy? Do you want it to be gory? Do you want it to be a psychological horror? So it's been a really interesting discussion. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So Monty, where can people find your books?
Well, my books, paperback, Kindle, hardback, Audible, all available on Amazon or audible.com. And my website has links to all this, and it's montecrabbs.com. And I also try to write a blog that's posted on that website once a month. Matter of fact, I better get on this month because I don't have it out there yet. But yeah, montecrabbs.com.
Well, we will be sure to pop a link in the description down below. So if you have enjoyed everything that Monty has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down there, click on that link, and go and check out his website. And you know what? While you are scrolling down there, you will pass that big empty comment section. So please leave a comment. Let Monty know how much you enjoyed everything he shared with us today. And there's also that like button. If you haven't already, give that a like, the subscribe button, and there's the bell icon that you can click every time to get notified when we have the next episode of Fully Booked, which of course we will do next week. So until then, cheerio.